Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very, very much for joining us for this webinar. We are here today to talk broadly about the impact of technology on access to justice, which I think you all will agree is a very, very topical thing. When we think about rule of law, we normally apply a four-limb definition. The first is that everyone is equal in front of the law. And in that sense, what I mean by that is it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or the monarch, rich or poor, you get treated the same by the law. The second is that everyone has access to the published law. And what I mean by that is if you don't know what the law is, how on earth can you seek its protection or comply with it? The third is that law is administered by an independent judiciary. And by that, I mean the judiciary is obviously independent. It's not subject to outside influence, and it applies the laws fairly and equally regardless of who sits before it. And the fourth one is everyone has access to justice, because even if you have fair laws which are applied fairly by an independent judiciary, if you can't get access to justice, then you don't have any remedy. And somewhat surprisingly, around the world, about 4 billion people live outside the protection of the rule of law, which is more than 50% of the world's population. And I think for those of us who sit in countries that have it, that might be quite hard to believe, but it's also not just a rest of the world problem. There are many challenges here in the UK and elsewhere along the lines of unmet legal need and so on. We are in the middle of a huge technological upheaval in our profession, and we are here to talk about the impact of that. Online dispute resolution, digital court reform, they offer new pathways that are faster, smarter, and more accessible. But does this mean there's light at the end of the tunnel? Is there a new generation of legal tech and AI tools which can transform how justice is delivered, accessed, and understood? Or do we run the risk of further entrenching the status quo, and there's growing inequality of arms between those who have access to these tools and those that don't? Does the legal tech actually close the justice gap in fragile or crisis-affected environments? Fortunately, we're here to try to help answer those questions, or at the very least debate them. I am Alexandra Smyth. I'm the General Counsel of LexisNexis, and our two very eminent speakers are the Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Voss. He's served as the Master of the Rolls and Head of Civil Justice for England and Wales since January 2021. He presides over the Civil Division of the Court of Appeal and leads the development of civil procedure and court reform. He chairs the Civil Justice Council, the Civil Procedure Rule Committee and the Online Procedure Rules Committee, and oversees the Advisory Council on National Records and Archives and the Forum on Historical Manuscripts and Academic Research. So Geoffrey also sits on the Law Tech UK panel and chairs both the UK Jurisdiction Task Force and the International Jurisdiction Task Force. Internationally, he is the first Vice President of the European Law Institute and serves on the steering group of the Standing International Forum of Commercial Courts. Lance is an Australian national who joined UNHCR as its General Counsel in October 2016. He was listed in 2023 as FT in-house legal leader, and the in-house legal team at the UNHCR has been highly commended 3 years in a row, 2023, 2024 and 2025 at the FT Innovative Lawyers Awards. Before joining the UNHCR, Lance was the Director of Legal Affairs of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, where he worked for 12 years. He's 30 years of legal experience of the United Nations, private commercial practice, and a domestic appellate court and government regulatory agency. He's published extensively on various topics of public international law, including privileges and immunities of the UN, amici curiae before international courts and tribunals, and the mandate of UNRWA. Before we hear from Sir Geoffrey, who I will turn this over to in a minute, let me remind you there's a Q&A function available on the webinar. So while you're listening to the conversation, feel free to submit questions, which we'll hopefully have time to put to the panelists at the end. So with that, let me turn the floor to Sir Geoffrey Voss for his opening thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. Good afternoon, everybody. And many thanks for the invitation to speak today on the subject of innovation, inequality, and the future of justice. Now, I believe quite strongly that we are at a turning point in all our societies, here and abroad, in relation to the delivery of justice. There are 3 fundamental changes that are occurring, and they will change legal advice and dispute resolution landscape beyond, I think, any kind of recognition. The first change is already happening across individuals, small businesses, and even multinational corporations. And the first question that those in need of legal advice used to ask was how they could obtain that advice from a lawyer. But now, in most cases and at all levels, the would-be clients are consulting, if individuals, freely available generative AI platforms such as ChatGPT and Copilot. And those platforms admittedly say that the legal information provided is not a substitute for advice from qualified lawyers, but in fact, many people get their first, if not only, answer to their legal questions from generative AI. And businesses, and particularly big businesses probably, use expensive specialist legal advice platforms such as Harvey or Legura, but they too often consult AI before going anywhere near to see their lawyers. The second change that is occurring mainly amongst individuals and small businesses is that they are using the same AI platforms to create a legal case for them. They can feed what used to be 2 carrier bags of coffee-stained papers into ChatGPT very easily. And then they can ask such a platform to produce a plausible legal case for them, whether against their employer, their landlord, their neighbor, their spouse, or anyone else. And this development is already being reflected in England and Wales in an increased number of county court claims that judges report seem to have been created by AI. The claims are often very well done, even if they sometimes, but definitely not always, turn out to be legally flawed. And our legal system is going to need to adapt very quickly, I think, to the increased volumes of claims and to dealing with claims generated very effectively by AI. And I should say also that I see no reason why we will not be able to adapt appropriately, but this is definitely a short-term and important challenge. The third imperceptible change is that those who still go to their lawyers start off by saying, in effect, that they've got the answer from AI, and all they want is for the lawyer to confirm what the AI has advised. And of course, they say they are only prepared to pay a fraction of what would previously they would have been charged for the privilege. And this development is leading law firms to hire lower numbers of newly qualified solicitors and lawyers, and to look instead to hire more experienced specialist lawyers in particular areas. Now, of course, my description of these 3 changes is necessarily generalized and anecdotal, but I've heard these stories so many times in the last year that I think it is worth trying to draw these threads together. These changes are not, in my view anyway, short-term. They seem likely to increase rather than the reverse. So the question for discussion is how, knowing what is happening, we can ensure that justice is delivered to all those in our societies, even the weakest and most vulnerable. And I can give 4 short answers to this question to provide a starting point for our discussion. So first, we should be careful to consider justice on the premise that AI in particular and technology in general will become better and more capable and will be used by the entirety of our populations. This is not a passing phase. And that explains, secondly, why we as lawyers and judges have to embrace the changes and turn them to the advantage of our entire society. And we can do this because technology provides a really fantastic opportunity to provide reliable legal advice, legal information, and dispute resolution services to many more people than ever before. And that's why I have been championing here in England and Wales the creation of our digital justice system. An integrated digital justice system can provide access to justice to many more of the 15 million or so people who have small legal disputes every year here in England and Wales. Our digital justice system is being created pre-action and post-action by the Online Procedure Rules Committee, which I chair and was mentioned by Alex earlier. It will bring together public and private providers of legal advice, legal information, and dispute resolution. It will provide connections between existing platforms and common data standards so that the data relating to any particular dispute can travel seamlessly from one provider to another and into the digital court system, if not settled before the court is needed. Thirdly, we should not be concerned, I think, about individuals and businesses accessing legal advice and information online. That may be a good thing to raise awareness of legal rights and responsibilities. Instead, we should be focusing on ensuring that regulated and reliable advice, information, and dispute resolution is readily available. AI platforms will, if we're careful about the architecture of the digital justice system, simply refer would-be disputants to reliable public and private platforms, which are able to provide economic, speedy, and effective legal advice, information, and dispute resolution. Fourthly, and finally, we need to be open to the possibility of people actually wanting their disputes to be resolved by AI. This possibility raises probably the greatest dilemma of our generation, because the right to a judicial decision by an independent and impartial human judge is so fundamental to liberal democracy. I've spoken a great deal about this question, but it seems to me that there is at least the reasonable possibility that machine-made judicial decisions that can be achieved more quickly and cheaply than human judge-made judicial decisions will become attractive to disputants in many kinds of cases. And one question may be whether we acknowledge a fundamental human right to human judicial decision-making at some stage, at least in the process. Another question may be whether a machine actually can ever be an independent and impartial tribunal for the purposes of Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, I'm actually still optimistic about using technology to deliver justice to more people more effectively in the age of ever more capable AI. And I look forward to discussing these questions shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Geoffrey. Couple of questions from me. You've been championing an integrated digital justice system, which you've just spoken about. If we imagine success in that in, say, 3 to 5 years, what do you think an ordinary person with a small dispute would notice is better about that?
Well, I think the ordinary person with a small dispute in 3 to 5 years' time will still be going on widely available AI platforms to get answers to their difficult questions. But what I hope is that once we establish the connections between regulated providers of dispute resolution services, once, for example, we have legal aid available online, that ChatGPT, if it's that platform, will simply refer people with a dispute. It'll say, look, we think this is probably the solution, but it'll refer people to the digital justice system, to providers within the digital justice system, and to regulated providers particularly. And that's incredibly important, because the one thing people don't get out of ChatGPT is something that they say, that is the final answer. I am absolutely sure it's validated by a lawyer. They know it's only validated by an AI platform, and that it's created by a mechanism that doesn't give it the final and absolutely dependable solution. So they need to be referred to either a lawyer or to a platform within a digital justice system, which is some kind of regulated environment. So that's what I see happening, and I'm very optimistic we can do it, in fact.
What are your thoughts on having a digital platform with an aging population, in particular amongst people who might be more technology averse? Do we risk sort of entrenching issues that maybe we don't have now?
Well, of course, the digital justice system, the first thing we've done in the Online Procedure Rules Committee is to create a framework for digital accessibility. And it is the most important foundation of what we do, that the same services must be available to people who are digitally capable to those who are not. But we should not be creating a system on the basis that people don't use AI, when we know that people of all ages do use AI. And therefore, whilst keeping an eye on vulnerable people who can't get access to digital services, we must create a system that caters for the need of our modern population, most of whom can and want to.
What is your view on how judges should respond to all of this? Should they have stricter rules, or should they have redesigned procedures that assume that everyone's using AI for their submissions?
Well, I think that's quite a big question, actually. We don't just redesign rules at the drop of a hat. My biggest and most important answer to that question is that judges must be absolutely aware of what's going on. They must be able to use AI themselves, and they must understand that the landscape is changing and understand how it is changing and how the changing landscape will affect the work they do. And it will affect the work they do very much, of course.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Lance now and let him join our conversation.
Thank you very much. Great to be here with you both. Maybe I can take as my point of departure, Sir Geoffrey, your question, how, knowing what is happening, we can ensure that justice is delivered to all those in our societies, even the weakest and most vulnerable. And let me offer a global view of innovation, equality, and the future of justice from a perspective of refugee and stateless people. I would preface this by saying I am overall an optimist, but let's have a look at setting some of the scene for that. So in 2025, over 117 million people were displaced, forced to flee their homes globally. And that's about one in 70 people on the planet. And over 4 million people were stateless. At UNHCR, my organization, the UN Refugee Agency, we work in some 130 countries, and these include Sudan, Chad, Syria, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Ukraine. And what we do is we work to protect the rights of, give urgent humanitarian assistance to, and help find solutions for people who are forced to flee or stateless. On the optimistic vein, we do believe and know that tech and AI have tremendous potential to transform lives of refugees and our humanitarian action, and to transform for good if used safely and responsibly. Together with refugees and a whole ecosystem of NGOs, from small non-governmental organizations that are headed by refugees themselves to large NGOs that are household names, other UN agencies, private sector and governments, we have been innovating. So what have we learned from this work that could be applied to this question of delivering justice to all those in our societies? Well, I think overall, to best help refugees enjoy their rights, it's indispensable to work with refugees where they are. I mean, physically, technically. So if you want to pick a fresh apple, you need to go to the tree. In terms of the engagement, you need to engage and engage meaningfully. Okay, so what does that look like? Let me outline here 4 features, and as I'm going along, let me react to a couple of your short answers, Sir Geoffrey, from the perspective of somebody working in UNHCR. I think first, there's usually low or no connectivity. 2.6 billion people, that's 32% of the world, still don't have internet access. That means no AI and widening global inequality. So while, for example, AI literate workers, studies have shown, earn 25% more than others, billions are locked out of tools changing the way we work. As one of our friends, Jonathan Cooley at Clifford Chance has put it, this isn't just a digital divide. It's a divide that will define our next generation's opportunities, health outcomes, and economic futures. So many refugees are in very remote areas, and I've been to some of those areas, bouncing and sliding for hours in a 4x4 on treacherous red muddy roads. There's no internet and they're not connected to an electric grid. So we need to adapt when we're putting solutions. We use offline or remote systems to register refugees in these areas. And registration can help secure identity papers, help access mobile money, help enroll children in school. And where 5G is alien, we use low connectivity. There's an acronym, of course, because there's lots of acronyms in our area, USSD solutions to connect. So there's no need for Wi-Fi, mobile data, or smartphone. And this is the kind of simple tech behind short codes to find out airtime or your mobile money balances, for example. And we use that to deliver services where they're needed. I think just this reflection more broadly on connectivity, I think, Sir Geoffrey, when they're in the UK, fine to be, I think, proceeding on the basis that all of the population will be using AI. I think we can't assume that where we're going, and so that informs the assessments that we make of the connectivity, part of an important plan for the way that we work with refugees. I think I pass to a second matter that's important when we're having a look at from this refugee perspective. Refugees and their host communities speak many languages and many dialects within those languages. And a fair few are ill-served by the large language models. Now that means, of course, that the way that Gen AI and other things that we're used to across English language LLMs just won't work as well. Let me give an example. Rohingya, which is the language of over 1 million refugees in Bangladesh, still has very limited LLMs, though there are some translation-focused models. So use of Gen AI in that context is going to be challenging. Another example, though, of adapting, our friends at the Oxford Institute of Technology and Justice faced a similar issue, working with a local women's association in Malawi to build a women's AI-powered legal assistant for survivors of violence to get critical legal information and support in real time. Now, the official language of Malawi is English, but Chichewa is the primary language spoken in Malawi, and it's minimally represented in major LLMs for now. So the tool that was developed by the Oxford Institute and their partners is aimed at frontline responders, teachers, social workers, medics, who are more likely to speak English. So they understood that they can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and took action, something which is common in our humanitarian sector. Third, touching on a point that has already been raised, Sir Geoffrey, referring to the framework for accessibility and question around older people is that we see as well is what's the literacy of refugees? The general literacy, the digital literacy, the financial literacy. And here we see that it can vary greatly from illiterate to very literate. So we introduced an innovative digital payment solution on the blockchain in 2022 to help forcibly displaced people in Ukraine. Why? Because we were able to build on a solid level of digital and financial literacy. Now, in other areas, it will be quite different. So we have, just to give another example of some of the many things that we in our ecosystem have done, at UNHCR in Jordan, we have an online feedback and information line for refugees, and something simple, we have a voice-to-text option to cater for those who prefer to speak or have difficulty writing. On a fourth point around meaningful engagement, I think one of the most rewarding and indispensable parts of innovating in the refugee sphere, and what's certainly had me fascinated and attracted to the area for over 20 years, is co-creating and collaborating with refugees and stateless people. Now, again, this sounds basic. It's basic design thinking, but I'm convinced, and we see from experience, this is the best way to get a solution that works for the people it's meant to serve, and it's a way to ensure that the tool is understood, is trusted, and has the right safeguards. So we are continuously extending and refining our flagship self-service registration and information portal for forcibly displaced people. That is UNHCR's digital gateway. For example, recently in India, we did a survey and found that 94% of people that we surveyed wanted something self-service. And an assessment of marginalised youth found 50% had no access to digital services. And refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless needed particular help to get birth certificates, which are critical to someone to get visibility before the law. And all of this shaped the rollout in late 2025. I think here, just coming to, again, one of the answers that you proposed, Sir Geoffrey, our experience with the digital gateway and other innovations is it supports your point absolutely. People who are seeking justice, there is a broad level of comfort to get reliable information online and not necessarily to be passing by a human. We see, in fact, from experience that when you have lots of questions and you have only humans in call centers, the capacity can be exceeded and people cannot get through, and so that they don't get any information. But what we're seeing as time goes by is that there are more and more people who are comfortable with this. So I think that supports the point that was made there. I would say that one of the challenges that we are finding, certainly with a global view, is how we get our information, which is reliable and accurate, how we can make sure that that is first up in when there is a search along ChatGPT or using a generalized platform. How do we make sure that that is part of the response? It's essentially learning the reflexes of the Google search algorithm and understanding that. It's a challenge, but we think we are of course not the only ones there who are trying to make sure that the best information is made available directly to those who need it. I think just to come back to the work with refugees on solutions, let me briefly touch on one of our ways of working on the Jordan information and feedback line that I mentioned. So we piloted that with over 1,000 refugees. Now that takes time and resources, but we did find that refugees did like the option to leave voice messages translated into text. They liked that an answer could come back within minutes from the tool if it were a simple matter, or triaged through to a human if it were more complex. Refugees also liked not having to pay for transport or spend time to travel to the office or to a centre to ask a person their question or wait on the phone to answer. We also asked young people whether they understood and could use the tool well, and also asked their parents. Again, trying to have a look at the real range of people who would use it to be understanding what are the needs and how things can be accessed. I would say as part of a humanitarian organisation, we have reflexes in our DNA, like many in the legal community broadly, to do no harm, to look carefully at risks, to protect personal data, and to test the security of the solutions. But we really find working closely with refugees, testing and retesting, that we not only take the steps or keep them in mind, but our solutions are understood. We are challenged to explain them and then trusted. Lastly, I think just this principle of co-creation and real listening it's not something that is new to the AI and tech age. It's not just for innovation in that area. In 2016, I took a step away from my legal job to be country director of the UN agency UNRWA that Alex referred to, their operations in the West Bank. Now, for many years, we had delivered mainly food assistance, flour, rice, lentils, oil, to poor Palestine refugee households. But we heard more and more people saying they wanted a change, variety, to cash. And we worked hard to make that change with communities everywhere. Well, my fantastic team and I did it, and we rolled out the West Bank's first unconditional cash transfers just before Ramadan began. I had the privilege of handing out the first ATM card to an older lady, Fatima. She looked at me and said, "Shukran, thank you, Mr. Lance. My last name is unpronounceable in many languages. Why did you wait so long? Now I don't have to wait in the heat of summer for food or in the cold winter rain. And I can buy what I need for my family because I know best." So let's not wait to change, to innovate, to address inequality. Refugees can't wait, and justice can't wait either. Thank you, and back to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Lance. That was incredibly fascinating. I've got a couple of questions just from me before I throw it open to the Q&A. We've already had quite a few questions come in, so people please keep sending your questions. We will try to address them. But Lance, from the perspective of refugees and those who are stateless, and beyond just usage numbers, what are some of the practical indicators that tell you that a new tool is actually delivering justice?
I think what you've mentioned there are actually a regular feedback mechanism of how is it going and how are you finding it is important, so the engagement. But then two, it needs to be part of something holistic. So it's not just a tool, yay, we've got a nice solution, go away. It's really that we and our ecosystem are looking, following up and then saying, so what's the impact of this? Were you able, I spoke about birth certificates, were you able to get the birth certificate? And then what next? So it's sustained follow-up to see how did that make an impact for it. So I think that there's, particularly when you've got interventions which are promoting birth certificates or some identity documents that then would unlock mobile money, we'll be doing as much as possible within our system to be following up to say, did it open up mobile money? So when we or one of our partners, are we able to transfer cash assistance or assistance so that you can get mobile money? So I think engagement, but making sure that you have a follow-up and that it is important to you from a human perspective, not just from measuring metric.
Yeah. So you also talked about the voice to text option, which is obviously a great example of meeting people where they actually are. Are there other features like that that you think are currently underused?
Yes, I think that as large language models improve and we have more and more languages of those who are displaced, particularly in Africa, where many of the languages are really very underrepresented. Many are oral, so it's not quite so easy to find your data set. You need linguists and anthropologists to do that. I think real-time translation and interpretation, this is something that will be a changer, particularly for when there's emergency response and there's needed for communications is one. And two, if we're looking at one of the important elements of a process for people to be getting a refugee status determination, so when an asylum seeker is part of a process, either with a state or with UNHCR in about 50 countries, to be going through that process, there's areas where this can be very useful. For example, when somebody comes along and has their in-depth interview, if you can record, transcribe immediately, and have a statement come out that then can be understood in the original language, read out and signed, this will reduce the time that is there for proceeding from initial interview along to the time when a determination is made. And I would say, maybe just to come, if I could, to Jeffrey on the element of access to justice, and would there be openness to AI making a decision? I would say, at least where we are for the moment, perhaps as much with refugees as internally with us, we're very much, I think, that it has to be human in the lead on making decisions on asylum going to refugee determination. There, I think that there would be a trust element, particularly if from either the state point of view, the organisation point of view, or the people involved point of view, the decision didn't go their way. I will also admit too that we're going through exactly the same thing that we see reflex amongst the legal community, which is, so will this be accurate? Will there be dangers in it? And I think that it is only through testing, and we see the rapid development in the tools and continually challenging ourselves, not saying, oh, this didn't work last year or 6 months ago, let's forget it. So I will say we're on the journey, but not there yet, and I'm not sure that we will get there, at least in the asylum procedure, of AI decision making, but certainly lots of scope for innovation within the processes and the access to critical information that leads up to that and people accessing their rights.
I've got a question. This is actually an audience question, so we'll move to that, but I'll address it to both of you. What do you think that developed legal systems can learn from the sort of things that Lance has just described?
Which one are you pointing at?
Both of you. So either one of you. I'm interested in both your perspectives on that, actually.
Well, okay. I mean, I think Lance is talking about different problems from the problems I'm talking about, and they're problems in which I have little expertise or experience, so it's difficult for me to comment. I think we're dealing with dispute resolution in a European country which is heavily affected by the advent of generative AI. I believe that generative AI will affect all countries, maybe not equally, and I've certainly had some contact with African judges who have expressed to me very great concern about the advent of hugely capable AI as really creating a further disadvantage for less privileged parts of the world. And I can see that that's the same for refugees, because they don't have access to the internet, they don't have access to AI, and in very many parts of Africa, that's exactly the same, whereas the developed world does. And so, and what can we learn from that? Well, I think we can learn what we need to remember at every stage in the journey, which is what I said, that you should be looking in everything you do at inclusion. You should be looking in everything you do at the vulnerable who don't have access. Now, in England and Wales, who knows what the percentage is, but it's a small percentage, maybe less than 10%. In a refugee community, maybe 100%. That's a very different problem, but there's still problems. And obviously you don't design an AI system for refugees who don't have access to AI. But I do think you need to keep very much in mind that even on Lance's figures, the access to the internet in the world is a majority of people. I've always been told it was over 5 billion people who do have access to the internet. And what I think is really important is not to assume that percentage won't grow, and that people at all levels in different societies will start to have it. And I'll just say one thing about Lance's thing about the language model. Of course, you're absolutely right. The large language models don't work so well in languages that are not often written down and don't have great literature and don't find themselves recorded in America on the internet, where the large language models are mostly created. But that will change. It's exactly the same. We have to know and understand that this is a new technology which is global, and it's not something that is just for Europe or America or China. It's global, and India, where it's used extensively by many people. And how that develops, we can influence, because we should be looking to achieve justice. We should be looking to achieve justice for all. In fact, I'm giving a speech on that very subject tomorrow. And obviously, I look at it from the context of a European country trying to deliver fair, expeditious, and just dispute resolution at proportionate cost to people in England and Wales. And that's my job. I'm head of civil justice here in England and Wales. But I think it's incredibly important to start from the understanding that justice means something different now to what it used to. It used to mean justice for the very few people who could afford it, even in our society. Now, it means in our society justice for everybody in every dispute they have, which are many millions of disputes, most of which never go near a court. And if you extend that beyond the borders of a developed country to a less developed country, you still have a requirement and understanding that justice ought to be for everybody. So you need to be using technology to deliver justice to those less privileged people as much as we're using technology to deliver in our country, in my opinion.
What are your thoughts, Lance?
I 100% agree with that, and I think even with your caveat, Sir Geoffrey, about refugee issues, I think that was I couldn't really add too much to it, and I think as well, I was involved in the mid-90s in leading an appellate reform project for the Queensland Court of Appeal in Australia. But I have an abiding interest in procedures and accessibility from that. But since then, I've stepped away from that. But I would only be echoing words there that I think, again, the solutions and accessibility and thinking who are the people who are accessing, and then finding solutions that work with them where they are. I think that, just as you've said it, this works whether it's in UK, Malawi, or Chad, for example.
But we have to be careful, because if there's no internet, and if actually in Africa, countries you mentioned, but many others too, the infiltration and the uptake of AI is very slow and patchy. Mm-hmm. It leads to a certain amount of disadvantage. I was told by an extremely impressive Senegalese judge that he described it as a new form of colonialism. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a very interesting point. I asked him what he meant, but what he meant was, because it's so patchy, because you cannot roll out generative AI in the way we can in England to a large percentage of the population almost overnight, it gives those who have it an advantage over those who don't, and those who have it are mostly in the developed world.
Yeah. I think a question, it sort of touches a little bit on what you were saying, Lance, and I guess in my opening comments about access to an independent judiciary. We've had a few questions around whether both of you could envisage a world where the first instance judgment is made by AI, but with a right of appeal to a human judge. You're smiling, Sir Geoffrey. I think this might be something you've looked at.
Up my street. You see, where does it stop? If you say, I accept that a first instance decision can be made by a machine, why are you saying that? You're saying because it's quicker and it's cheaper to go to the machine, which can decide the issue in seconds, than waiting for a human judge, which might take years in some jurisdictions, decades in other jurisdictions. Well, then, of course, people would prefer it. Then why would they not prefer to go to an appeal to a different platform, also in days or minutes, rather than years or decades. So there isn't a line that you can draw when it comes to judicial decisions. And I think it's really important to understand that there is a line between administrative decisions made by governments or made even by big corporations or by anybody who's deciding anything, and the judiciary and a judicial decision. And the line is that the judicial process is the last protection for the rights of the individual against the state, rights of the individual against another individual or corporate. And so there's a very different thing in saying that I am entitled to have my final rights decided by an independent and impartial judicial tribunal, and that can simply be a machine. It's a different thing. I'm not saying it's bad. Of course, it's cheap, and I think a lot of people would agree to it without thinking what implications it had for the future. But I think we, as lawyers and judges, and even, if I may say, human rights specialists, need to think extremely carefully about the implications of that for our society. Because it's not because of bias, actually. Machines are biased, so are humans. Everybody's got some bias. You can train machines to be biased in one way or another, and you can probably, in years to come, obliterate much of their bias. It's not about that. It's about confidence of humanity in having their rights determined by a machine rather than by a human. Now, and I think the really difficult question is what happens when they say, no, I want that. I want it because it's cheap. I want it because it's quick. And you must give it to me because I want it. And in many areas of society, people can become more and more clear about that. So I think we have to have this debate early on to find out what's acceptable. So you, Alex, say, well, obviously, it would, your question implies, obviously it would be acceptable to have the first instance decision because you can always to a human. But what if then actually it's a lot cheaper and quicker, and actually there aren't any judges because there weren't any first instance judges because it was all machines, and therefore there was nobody trained to become an appellate judge. So that didn't work very well. So I think these lines are very fuzzy, and I think it's super important to have this debate before it becomes a reality and people are actually saying, do it.
I think, I mean, just from perspective as a lawyer, I think debate is something you see outside the judiciary, you see it in our profession. A question of, if I can do a lot of the junior end, how will people learn the judgment they need as a more senior lawyer? But that's a question that we can all grapple with. I think, Lance, from a human rights perspective in particular, what do you think it would mean for refugees or stateless people if efficiency did actually trump human judgment?
I think there would be loss of trust in the system.
Okay.
Well, and also just thinking that refugees, what are refugees? They're often fleeing persecution because of who they are, gross violations of human rights, of international humanitarian law, and for things that don't always come before courts at all are at the root of their flight and not being able to return home. So again, it's thinking the efficiency is for whom? If it's for the entity rather than the people, that's, well, one, it's not human-centered, but that's unlikely to lead to some kind of trust in the institutions, and they will then become just another institution in just another country where you stay away from, and you understand that you need to try to seek justice in some other way there, and that's not always peaceful. There's a whole range of other elements. So I think particularly in the human rights aspect of it, I hope I'm not, and particularly for where we are, I would be very skeptical about that. And I think I would be with you, Sir Geoffrey, that I think that there's a spectrum where people can be comfortable. And I think at one spectrum, getting compensation in relation to delayed or cancelled aircraft, airline flights. That's not before judiciary, but if you're thinking of the pre-judicial phases, just with companies that are often being done AI, there's an increased, I think, comfort level with people in terms of thinking, okay, there's a possibility of getting something. It's not a big effort. I won't get too cranky. I'll just do it and then see what comes from it. As you move along, though, towards the more complex and the ones that come to the root of what it is to be human and what it is to be a refugee, I think that's where we need to keep human in the lead.
Well, you see, Lance, I used to agree with you.
Yep.
And I used to think it was obvious that if you had, for example, a claim for personal injury and you wanted to be compensated, you would much prefer to have your damages assessed by a machine and get your damages very quickly and not have to spend a lot of money on costs, because it's a fairly mechanical, algorithmic exercise to work out how much you're entitled to under the law, and a machine can do it. That sounds like your airline delay compensation. Why should it not be assessed by a machine? It's an algorithmic calculation affecting everybody. And that makes perfect sense. But the line is problematic. I used to say, but of course, giving an example at the other end, nobody would accept having their child taken away from them by a machine-made decision, because it's a human, emotional decision requiring empathy and understanding of the human condition. And I think you would say exactly the same for immigration decisions, asylum decisions. It's a human, empathetic decision requiring application and understanding of the human condition. But I gave a lecture in Oxford where I said this, and several Oxford professors, very distinguished ones, said, no, exactly wrong, because actually where there is some real emotional involvement, people would much prefer to have the decision detached from human emotion and would like to see it decided on entirely rational grounds by a machine, trained appropriately, of course. And they may be right, they may be wrong, I'm not convinced they're right, but it's not a universal given that we all agree about this. And this is why I keep on talking about a debate, because it seems to me that you and I may agree or we may disagree, but until we have a general understanding within society as to the relevance and importance of human judicial decision-making, we are going to risk being forced by commercial pressures into something that is not only less than optimum, but very damaging indeed. And so I think we have to have this discussion at a very early stage. Commercial pressure is going to be huge because machine-made decisions take no time at all and cost nothing. And even in your refugee situation, it's not about money perhaps, because they haven't got money to pay, but it is about time. An asylum decision, certainly in this country, can take a long time, and most refugees would rather have their decision made very quickly. And if a machine took it and it could be made quickly, maybe they'd say, fine, I don't care. But so I think, I think there's a lot of factors that come into the question. And I also agree with you that we should have this debate on a multinational basis. It's not about the society in England and Wales or the society in Malawi or wherever the other countries would be. It's about actually the basic functions of humanity. And those are very difficult issues. And it's a shame, really, that we're being forced to decide or consider these questions so quickly because of the rapid advance of technology. You know, a few years ago, sorry, I've talked too much, but a few years ago, we'd have been able to say, well, technology never advances as quickly as you think, and it's not really going to change in the next few years. We've got plenty of time. AI has started in, what was it, November 2022, and here we are in 2026, and we're basically assuming it's so capable that it can do most of what we can do, which is, you know, quite a short time scale.
So sort of building on that, I suspect I know what both of your perspectives will be, but this is a question that has come in. And what unintended consequences do you anticipate if AI scales globally before appropriate diversity, linguistic or legal, is appropriately incorporated? You know, if it stems out of English-speaking countries with a certain type of legal system, how do you see that playing out around the world?
Injustice.
What about you, Lance? The same?
Yes, poorly is it. But again, I would say, I mean, just coming back, this given developments, and this is not something that we should just say, oh, it's going to be bad. Okay, I turn off, I'll go and have a cup of coffee after this. I mean, we need to build, as you note, Sir Geoffrey, I mean, in terms of the glass 2/3 full, in terms of internet access, the connectivity we need to improve. And there are many who want it to improve, including big tech and others who will work hard to make it happen for a variety of reasons, including commercial ones. That's one. Two, the LLMs, yes, there is work on that, because again, when you see the power of AI across large language models such as English, you see the way that it can work positively elsewhere. So I think and I do like what you referred to, Sir Geoffrey, in terms of, I mean, you referred before in terms of a multinational debate in relation to the human part in judicial making, in justice. And I think similarly here, it's a bit of a call to action, I would say, is that the tech and the AI will continue to develop, and doing nothing is not an option, because doing nothing is accepting that you're going to be going backwards on it and that you accept the digital divide. And I do, again, hopefully not just for an optimistic bent, but I do think that there are many in the broader government, multinationally, and legal community and tech community who want to see progress on these elements more broadly, and not just to accept that this is the status quo and that the English language, Gen AI, LLM related bits will rule.
Can I just say something about the importance of the human? Mm-hmm. I think the one piece in the jigsaw that is missing often from the discussion is that it's all very well to say that an AI can and will make a decision in a few minutes. But humans do not get used to decisions made against them in a few minutes. They take months or sometimes years to go through the human process of acceptance, which is in that graph. And that is why, fundamentally, lawyers are not just for yesterday. Because even if AI decisions were accepted, and they will be accepted in many fields, even if not in judicial fields, people still need to have those complex decisions explained to them. They need to understand why it was made with a human process of reasoning, not the machine's process of reasoning, which they can't understand and never will understand. And so this question of time is a critical factor, as much, I think, for refugees with the decision being made about them as in respect of disputes between commercial entities or between individuals. Time is what allows humans to accept decisions, and time is not something that AI provides.
And maybe if I could just complement that from seeing the way that there's the formal justice system, but also in traditional justice system, for example, in the Middle East, the Muqtar, and in many African areas where this is justice through families and clans. And I think in addition to the time, there's the importance of ritual in some cultures where the human part is integral to it, to the acceptance of a decision that is made. Maybe as culture develops, we will have more of into the ritual, we will accept more into the ritual machines and AI, but for the moment, I think in many areas for this traditional approach, there's the ritual and the time, which is important to acceptance and a feeling that justice has been delivered.
Thank you both very much. We're into our last 35 seconds, so I don't think I'm going to be able to summarize everything we've discussed. I'm not even going to try, except I'm going to say that it's obviously an area that is ripe for debate. It's very, very topical. It's something we all have to think about. There are no clear right or wrong answers. I mean, you might argue there are, but I think people disagree. Thank you both so much for your time. And just to let everybody know, on this webinar, it is recorded. We will distribute it, and you can continue to engage in this discussion on our social media channels. I don't think this question is going away. So thank you both very, very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.